Thanks, guys. Thanks for the intro. Yeah, I was just commenting earlier. I love coming to London. It's one of my favorite cities in the world, but it's always great to be here, and there's so much good food and so many great restaurants. And I will tell you a story. Last weekend, I knew I was coming to Europe, and so, in fact, I was in Dublin before I got to London. And my son is also a big steak guy too, so we were like, okay, before I leave, I'm going to go order some big steaks and cook them on the grill. So I had my steak before I left, but the food here is fantastic. We went to a great Japanese restaurant last night, which was fantastic. Hopefully I'll get some Indian food in before I leave as well. But anyway, first of all, thank you for having me here. It's great to be partnering with Open Reality to be part of this event. It's great to see so many people here. I joined the parent company for Ekahau, Ziff Davis, back a year ago, and I've made a lot of changes within the organization. In fact, we're integrating Ekahau and a number of other businesses we have acquired over the years into one entity, and it's under the brand Ookla. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about Ookla and the changes we're making. It's a new company in terms of the culture and the personalities that we have within the business, but also in how I'm managing the business and where we're refocusing the business as well. So I've made a lot of changes over the last year. I got a few more changes that I'm rolling out this year, but I would say that the shift that I'm making is really making us a more customer-focused business. So really intently focused and obsessed with how we take care of our customers and how we help our customers help their customers, because often we're one step back behind that. The other thing which is very important about sort of our mission, and this is something that goes back to the heart of the company, it's how do we improve connectivity for everybody. So it's sort of a belief that we have in the business, which is how do we continue to encourage and enhance the connectivity wherever it exists in the world for every customer in the world. And so we work with operators, we work with partners around the world, but it's all with a mission of improving connectivity because we think that that drives economic growth, it drives economic prosperity, and it's also good for social development as well as a community. So we're very focused on that. Everything we do is about how we draw insights through measurements and through data that we collect. How do we help our customers deliver better networks, and at the end of the day, delivering a better experience for everybody. So I got a few charts here, and I know I've only got like 15 minutes, probably now 13 minutes, but I'm going to try and cover this in some detail. So we have 4 key brands which fall underneath the umbrella of Ookla. The first one is Speedtest. Everybody knows Speedtest. Everybody runs Speedtest. The one thing that I wanted to share is, and these are data points that we talk about, but we collect over 1 billion samples a day right now, RF scanning samples on devices all around the world. And this is just active tests that we do within the industry, where customers are running proactive tests, and we collect a lot of data through those tests, but we also collect a lot of data on different networks those devices are connected to. So within the Speedtest umbrella, we're connecting and collecting billions and billions of samples. And so it gives us tremendous insight into kind of what's going on within the network, how applications function over those networks, and then we work with our customers to feed that data into how they optimize and tune those networks. And my background, by the way, before I came over to this part of the business, has been on the operator side for about 30 plus years, building and operating wireless networks on the infrastructure side. And so this kind of data is just invaluable in terms of how we improve that. But we also work with regulators and governments on how to improve policies and how do we make more access to spectrum available, because that is the lifeblood of every network. And so we work at different levels, not just with the operators, but also with regulators and governments on helping to drive improved connectivity. I think everybody's heard of Down Detector now, especially over the last 30 days, between the AT&T outage, the Meta outages, and then also McDonald's. And Down Detector is a fantastic platform we have. It's often an early indicator. It's measuring consumer sentiment. Consumers are feeding that platform. We look for anomalies on applications globally. And I can tell you that as a former CTO, often you'd look at Down Detector and then you call the NOC and say, hey, I'm seeing something going on here. What's happening with the network? So because sometimes in the network you don't actually see what's going on, because you're monitoring sort of the network layer, and in fact the customers are having challenges with applications, and it could be the interconnection points between the networks, it could be other parties that are connected to the network, it could be the CDN, and as an operator you're managing your own network but you can't see beyond that. And Down Detector is a great, I call it a canary in the coal mine. It gives you sort of an early indicator that the customers are seeing a problem even before we may see a problem in the network. And so it's a great way to kind of get an indicator to start looking at where you might have some issues in the network. So it's a great platform, but it's getting a lot of attention recently. It's sort of a good day for Down Detector is a bad day for the industry, is the way we look at it, because when people start using it, it's often an indicator that there's a problem in the system or somewhere within the network, and it's global. And I don't know how many people watch this, but it was interesting. McDonald's app problems were getting reported by consumers in Australia very early, and it turned out to be a global problem that ended up shutting down stores. So, it's pretty significant, but it's a great platform for that. Route Metrics is another platform we have where we do drive test, we do venue testing, we look at monitoring major events, and we look at performance of networks in major events and major venues. And just an obvious one that we do in the US is Super Bowl. So we manage and monitor what's going on within that infrastructure during Super Bowl across all the networks in that environment. And so then we work with the partners that we have to make sure that we're optimizing that performance real time while while those events are on as well. And then obviously the one that everybody here is very familiar with is Ekahau. And it's a terrific brand. It's a great product. It's one that's evolving. And again, it's sort of a new company and a new day for us as we're shifting the focus of Ekahau now to be much more focused on you as customers, our partners, and then also helping you to serve your customers better. So we're going to continue to invest in that platform. We're going to make it much better. And we're looking for feedback, and we're going to work with everybody in the community to make sure we bring that feedback in and make the product much better. So I've already touched on this, and again, my time's limited, so I'm going to hit a few points here, but I've already said it's all about better insights. What you see is some screenshots here, and the one that, frankly, I like, and it's really cool, is the one in the middle there, where we do a 3D rendering, and we can look at the performance of networks in cities globally, literally floor by floor in a building. And so this is a prediction model where we do a lot of data measurements, and we can estimate what the performance is there. So what you see is different color coding, which indicates the performance of those networks floor by floor in buildings in a 3D rendering. We also, with the data that we collect, even on the speed test side, we can measure sort of what's going on in terms of Wi-Fi offload, where that Wi-Fi is occurring, how much tonnage is occurring. And the example I use, and it's not here on the chart, is like LAX. When I was at Sprint, I had a lot of problems getting in-building systems deployed and DAS and getting onto DAS systems. And frankly, I didn't have the money to do it because it's very, very expensive, as you guys know, building out DAS systems. And so I actually worked with Boingo back in 2015 to offload onto the Wi-Fi systems. And in fact, I was looking at some of this data and seeing how much Wi-Fi was being used in certain venues. And LAX is a great example. It's really hard there, and I don't know how many people fly through LAX, but the Wi-Fi there is actually pretty good. Compared to the cellular coverage. And so, we worked on that, but I used these tools to see kind of what was going on in those buildings and those venues to see where and how I could offload that network. And at the end of the day, it's all about building better experiences, because all of this stuff is great, all the data is nice, it's interesting, but at the end of the day, it's got to deliver results, and those results are measured in terms of the experience our customers have on those networks. Just in the interest of time, I won't go through this, but it's all about creating customer-centered networks. Data is great, but to me it's like crude oil. Crude oil is interesting, but you can't run a car on crude oil. But you've got to get to process data that allows you to make good decisions. The one thing I did want to touch on, and you'll see the lovely format, it's the classic Ekahau look. But I did want to talk a little bit about Wi-Fi, and I'll share a perspective with you on Wi-Fi coming out of sort of the cellular industry and having grown up on that side of the industry. There was always some tension, even if you go back like 20 years ago, a lot of thought around wireless operators thinking that Wi-Fi was a threat to their business. I can tell you I never actually saw that as a threat. I actually thought it was very, very complementary. And in fact, I'm going to date myself here. In fact, I was looking it up this morning just to double check the dates. But we were looking at Wi-Fi offload and doing, and I don't know how many people in the room go back this far, but we were looking at UMA and how to do voice over Wi-Fi at Singular back in 2005. And we're looking at how do we leverage the coverage that Wi-Fi could provide in homes to move voice coverage, and back then even just messaging coverage over Wi-Fi. But there was a lot of discussion and debate within the industry back in that period whether Wi-Fi was a threat or whether it was an opportunity. In fact, and it's almost embarrassing to say now, but when back then, we were actually in the US looking to disable the Wi-Fi in the phones to prevent people from using Wi-Fi. I mean, it's ridiculous when you go back. But that was only 20 years ago. And then what really changed sort of how Wi-Fi was viewed, at least in the operator side, was when the iPhone came out. and that pushed and promoted the use of Wi-Fi on devices, because Apple was basically not taking direction from the operators. They were like, we're building a phone, it's for our customers, we're putting Wi-Fi in there. And I don't know how many people know the history of sort of Steve Jobs and Wi-Fi, but he was a very, very big proponent, and Apple's always been a big proponent of Wi-Fi. So that really sort of shifted the industry. And so Wi-Fi became much more dominant. And that's why I used the example back in 15. I realized that Wi-Fi, for me, even at Sprint, was like really, and I called it like the fourth layer of our network. And there's some reasons why it's the fourth layer and not the third or the second. But we saw Wi-Fi as a huge opportunity to move that. And what's interesting is, and this is another background, I was at Dish before I came over here, and there's a lot of talk about private 4G and private 5G networks. But Wi-Fi itself is becoming the solution for mission critical networks, because it's very cost effective, it's very efficient, and it's a very good platform. It just needs to be designed in the right way. It needs to have the appropriate security put in place, but it is becoming sort of the vehicle to deliver enterprise grade mission critical networks. And I think the technology is fantastic. I think the opportunity is still early, but it's clearly taking off. Now, there are cases where, for various reasons, you might want to use private 5G and other technologies, but I clearly see Wi-Fi as becoming a really important part of that, and it is mission critical, and it's only going to become more and more important as enterprise use and leverage this technology for many, many applications in their environment. And there's so many devices today connected, but the cost of incorporating Wi-Fi into the, any kind of device connected to the network is only going to continue to come down. So I think there's an exciting future for this business, at least for the next 20, 30 years. And I think I'm going to touch on this, but the amount of spectrum that's becoming available to use in this band or used for Wi-Fi is also exciting as well. Great data point here in terms of the number of active networks. Great history here of industry collaboration to drive it. And it's interesting because I often contrast, IEEE and the development of Wi-Fi versus 3GPP. And I don't know how many people have sat in a 3GPP meeting, but that is one of the most politically charged, agendarized meetings, and everybody's looking out for their own IPR, and it's like, it's no wonder they take so long to get anything done there. Wi-Fi is just a terrific platform, and the industry's done a great job of evolving that so much faster. And it's interesting, and I'll just share another little data point. When you start looking at what you can do over 5G, and you look at sort of the MIMO configurations and the modulation and the like, and then you look at Wi-Fi and you're like, hang on a minute, like these guys are at least 5 to 10 years behind Wi-Fi in terms of the functionality and capability you can get. So, kudos to the industry in driving this, but it's definitely putting a lot of pressure on the other guys to kind of move. But those 3GPP meetings are painful at best. This is one thing I did want to talk a little bit about too, which I actually think is really interesting as the industry evolves, is the access to spectrum. It is so hard to get spectrum. And, as a wireless operator, I still remember when we were arguing about 20 to 30 megahertz of spectrum and 40 megahertz of spectrum, and how do you get access to 50 megahertz of spectrum? I think it's a testament to the regulators in the industry to drive this and drive the availability of spectrum for Wi-Fi and unlicensed usage. When you start looking at this, and I'll give you an analogy I used many years ago when I was in the cable industry. We had, gigahertz cable plan. We're talking about 750 megahertz and 1 gigahertz, in terms of spectrum that we had available on cable to be able to deliver services to the home. And back then, people were talking about using wireless to deliver the same services that cable was delivering. But the wireless operators back then had 20 to 40 megahertz of spectrum. So you just do the math. It's like, okay, gigahertz on cable versus, 20, 30, 40 megahertz. I mean, at the end of the day, you're not going to compete with that amount of spectrum. Now that we're seeing this level of spectrum available for Wi-Fi 6, the amount of services you can deliver and the performance you can deliver over the spectrum within an environment is just phenomenal. And so I think this is really exciting where the industry is going. I applaud the US, frankly, for opening up and making this band available. But you'll see that in other countries, there's sort of certain operators who are trying to drive this and influence the outcome of this spectrum. But I think I applaud the industry for continuing to push this. But the more spectrum available, then the more capability and the more services we can offer over that using Wi-Fi technology as well. Lots more devices coming in terms of 6 gigahertz. And then the other thing which is interesting to me is, obviously the emergence of Wi-Fi 7, but also 6E and the adoption of 6E. And you always see this, and there's, a classic model where you look at sort of product adoption and product adoption curves, and it's called the Bass diffusion model. So when you look at that and you look over the history of product adoption, where there's an adjacency in terms of the capability set, you'll often see a much faster adoption curve. And what we're seeing is that. really take place. So, if you make a fundamental shift in the technology or the product, it normally takes a long time. And it's a classic S-curve. But when that adjacency is really tight and the product's very close, then you'll see a very rapid adoption curve. So, I think we're just at the early days of this, but I think we're going to continue to see this emerge and grow. But very exciting space to be in. Ekahau's a great platform, and we're definitely going to continue to invest and keep our product up to date and continue to move the needle in terms of the performance and what we deliver in capability. But we've definitely got an eye towards the future. The other thing which I'll leave you with is coming back to where I started, which is, we have a lot of capabilities in terms of the cellular and wireless infrastructure, and we work with operators around the world. And there's a lot of capability set that we bring in terms of how to think and design those networks and optimize those networks. And we're bringing that into Wi-Fi, and then we're taking the experience of Wi-Fi into those networks. So just how you tune networks, how you think about networks, how you think about RF, and how you think about the performance of those networks. There's a big difference in the performance of a network if it's very, very well designed versus one that is sort of a random, hey, I just throw it out there. And my background is RF engineering, so I'll get a little geeky here, but when you start looking at propagation models and prediction models, they're not all created equal. And you can make some very expensive mistakes if you don't have very good prediction models. And so, having the data that gives you the performance and allows you to make very accurate predictions can give you much, much higher performance at a much lower cost. And that's what we're about, and that's what Ookla is about in terms of how do we use the data we collect, how do we provide better insights to build those better networks, and at the end of the day, it's about delivering the best experience at the lowest cost. So it's great to be here, great to be part of this event. Thank you, Open Reality, for being partners in this, and really excited about today. And I know I'm out of time, but happy to take conversations afterwards. I know we don't have time to do Q&A on stage here, but I'll be around all day and happy to field any discussion you guys want to have. So thank you, guys. Thank you very much.